There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Well, I have just had to accept the fact that if you're going to have this in the background, this lovely picture, the bottom half of this lovely picture that Lindy's sweetie, Lori, and Lindy gave to me as a present, you're going to have to also have a really unattractive view of part of my kitchen. Unless I can shrink the view, but then you're not going to lose the perspective on the freaking picture. So, it is what it is. I'm here to do a tag that everybody and their dog did, I don't know, 3 months ago or more, I'm not sure. But it was one that I had on my list to get to eventually, and here I am. I had to suck up to one of the tag originators to beg to be allowed to do it, because nobody tagged me, and maybe some people did and I didn't notice, but anyway, I got special dispensation from Jolene of Bookworm Adventure Girl to do it. So this is the Think Twice book tag, and it was co-created by Jolene at Bookworm Adventure Girl and AJ at AJ Dunn Reads and Writes. I will have the links to both of their videos in the show notes, and 1,000 people have done it. So I'm going to have fun thinking of who I might tag. Didn't think of that until right now. Anyway, and I've had 2 glasses of wine, because, you know, this is the Think Twice book tag. So, you know, what could go wrong? Here are the prompts. Number 1, Double Vision, a book that features twins. I have 2, and they're both pretty queer. One is this manga from Japan, translated into English, My Brother's Husband. Here's volume 1, and here's volume 2. Gengoro Tagame, translated from the Japanese by Anne Ishii. The premise of this is that identical twins in Japan were born and grew up, and one was gay and the other one was straight. And when the gay twin came out to the straight twin, it didn't go well, which was in large part the reason why the gay twin moved to Canada and found a fabulous, bearish gay husband, seen on the right. And then, sadly, shortly into their new marriage, the gay twin died suddenly. So the widower Canadian gay husband comes to Japan to look up his dead Japanese gay husband's identical twin brother and his daughter, and plot ensues. It's wonderful. I'm not a big fan of graphic anything. I just think it's not really up to snuff compared to, you know, the written word, but this was really excellent. And there's volume 2. And the other one is this Nigerian-Canadian novel, Butter, Honey, Peg Bread by Francesca Ekweyasi. Oh my god, I love this book so much. And it is about a pair of twins, one queer, one straight, who are estranged. Among many other things the story is about, one of the central things the story is about these 2 twins coming back together and finding healing. Their mother, well, I'm going to talk about their mother in another entry. This is going to serve for a couple different prompts, so stay tuned. I found the queer twin, Taye, I believe is the pronunciation for her name. She was one of the most fascinating characters I read about last year. Her straight twin, Kehinde, I'm sorry, I'm not really up on the pronunciation, was a little bit less so, but their relationship was fascinating, and the fact that they were estranged and the reason for that and how the story ends was fascinating. Maybe this is a good time to mention that I once had an opportunity to have a threesome with a gorgeous set of twins in Toronto in the early 1990s, and I was too flustered to go through with it. I've been kicking myself ever since. But that's not what this tag is about. Number 2, Double Talk, a book with 2 or twice in the title. So what have I got here? I have 2. You know, I probably could have found more, but these 2 are interesting books that nobody's really talking about on BookTube that I'm aware of. Not recently. Anyway, this is If I Had 2 Wings, Stories by Randall Keenan, a queer Black American author, and this was published posthumously. Or was it? It was published around the time of his death. No, I think it was published just before he died, quite young, like 55 or something. And I think I'm going to be reading this. I was hoping to read this for Black History Month, but we'll see. I haven't read anything by Randall Keenan. I've been collecting his oeuvre for years, and this is the latest one. And here is another one I think I might try to fit in for the Irish Readathon next month. No commitments, people, no commitments. The Irish poet Evan Boland's memoir, or, yeah, is it a memoir? Autobiographical essays. A Journey with Two Maps. Becoming a Woman Poet. I don't like poetry, typically, and I've read one short book of her poetry, which I absolutely loved. And I studied her way back in the early 90s when I took an undergrad course in Irish Lit. And my professor, Ron Markin, was really into poetry. So we had to read a whole bunch, and I'm so glad. And one of them was Evan Boland, and I actually love her stuff today. So for that reason, I picked up this book of her essays, and let's see if I might learn something about poetry. What do you think the two maps are? I'm going to guess one is her Irish identity, and the other is her female identity, or it could be her poet identity. Prompt number 3, Seeing Double. A book with a reflection, shadow, or mirror on the cover. I found 2 with reflections. They're nothing special. The books that I found, I'm looking forward to telling you about, but the cover image was just kind of okay. One I've read and one I haven't. This is an archipelago book by a Dutch author, Willem Frederik Hermans, An Untouched House. And I love this. This is one of the best books that I've read about World War II. And there is the mirror image of there's a light outside a house. It looks like a house that's reflected in the water. So I guess maybe that's the untouched house. It is about, it's at the very end of the war, and a weary bunch of Dutch partisans stumble upon a luxurious, intact estate in an abandoned town. And so they kind of take it over and kind of relax. The war's almost over, and then the Germans retake the town, and plot ensues. It's horrifying and completely pitch perfect about how insane war is. And secondly, this German novella, which I haven't read yet but very much want to, Old Rendering Plant by Wolfgang Hilbig. And there you can see the reflection of the, I believe it's the old rendering plant that's in a state of not discomposure, decomposition, no, disarray. There's a better word. What is the word I'm looking for? In a state of, in a dilapidated state. I knew it was a D word. It's a striking cover image. And at the beginning of the story, a young boy is obsessed with an empty and decayed coal plant, which I guess is a rendering plant, or is that different? I don't know. And he starts to create his own private mythology as a young kid about what that is all about, what that place is all about. It wasn't a coal plant, and then it became an abattoir. Well, that's a rendering plant, right? And he is still around, and he has to make a different mythology or something. All I know about this book is that I read the first 10 pages to Lindy during the Concussion Reading Project over a year ago, or about exactly a year ago, and we both loved the writing, so I have to get to this. 4, Take Two. 2 book covers that look similar, but are by different authors, and I guess I'm not so interested in this one. So I didn't do a thorough review of all the covers in my library. At first I thought, oh, I can cheat the Barbara. There was one edition of the Barbara Pym novels that had very similar cover designs, and then I noticed, but are by different authors. Damn! So I'm going to put screenshots. I had to Google this topic to find anything, and so here's what I came up with. These books are not going to be in the show notes, by the way. Life is too short. This one's interesting. Britt Bennett's The Vanishing Half and Jacqueline Woodson's Red at the Bone. Those covers are quite similar. Here are 3 books you couldn't pay me to read. I'm not even going to name them. Oh, and Tyler I'd like to read, but the rest of them look like trash. And then Your Heart is a Muscle the Size of a Fist by Sunil Yapa. I read that book, and it wasn't very good, but it had things about it that were good, but it was ultimately a rather tremendous failure. The Queue by Basma Abdel Aziz. My debut episode of Bite Size Book Chats. Sharon and I had a chat about that book, and Mark Sloka, Nobody's Son, so they're all I's, okay. And this one is mostly the font, but it's not just the font. The only author on that list that I'm familiar with is Ramona Osobel. I believe I've read one of her collections of short stories. I quite enjoyed it. And finally, Stone Mattress, must be the paperback or a different edition than I have, by Margaret Atwood. I did a Zoom pseudo buddy read thing with Heather of Soggy Expat Book Nerd about that. A Brief History of Seven Killings by Barlin James, which sounds awful. And Edgar Carret, The 7 Good Years, which I know nothing about. So there you go. That's the best I could do. I Google cheated my way to come up with an answer for that one. Number 5, I second that. A retelling. Well, don't get me started. I think retellings are the most disgusting things in all of literature. It's lazy crap. Don't retell, and especially don't retell myths. Myths are the bane of my reading existence. They're so stupid. It's just like Christianity without the religion, but they're just as stupid as the Bible. Get them out of my fiction. So I hate retellings passionately. And the first novel that I read that made this ideology, this reading ideology spring forth in me was many years ago when I read the gay novelist Mark Merlis's retelling An Arrow's Flight. It was some Greek myth bullshit. It was so boring. So, yeah. Are you sorry you asked? Number 6, 2 can play at that game. A character who plays 2 roles or has an alter ego. I struggled with this one a bit because I had trouble getting my head around alter ego, but I think I got it. So, I have a few. Viet Tan Wins The Sympathizer is probably the farthest thing from being a Sean book that I actually liked a lot. I read the sequel, it was crap, but The Sympathizer was really good, and definitely that protagonist. He's playing both sides against the middle. He's a double informant. There's a double agent. So is that the same as a what is the word of this tag? Is that the same as an alter ego? Kinda. Let's just go work with me here. The next one is The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, which I did on audio from LibriVox, which was quite a decent audio narration of the book. It's a really plotty novel. It's also quite far from a Sean book, but I really liked it. I thought it was really well done. And The Woman in White. There is a devious plot that the villains in that novel try to pull off, which involves creating an alter ego for the Woman in White. I'll leave it at that. If you've read the novel, you'll either know what I'm talking about or you'll realize that I've completely forgotten what I read. But and similarly, Mouth to Mouth by Antoine Wilson. It was on some list this year. Was it the Booker? I don't know. It was on some prize list last year. I read it before all that nonsense happened and really enjoyed it. So I'm about to say, and it was quite a departure for me. It was not really a Sean book. So what is this with doppelgangers, or not doppelgangers, alter egos, not being a Sean book that Sean the Bookmaniac actually likes? I don't know. The protagonist saves a man's life by rescuing him from, he's swimming and he's drowning, and he rescues him, performs CPR, and then the man goes off to hospital, and he never really was not conscious enough to even see the young man who rescued him. But the young man becomes obsessed with this man that he rescued, this older man, 60 years old or something, and starts not stalking him, but researching him, Googling him, and then eventually applies for a very low-level, entry-level job at the art gallery that is owned by that man, and plot ensues. So that's kind of doppelganger, isn't it? Do I really get what a doppelganger... Is it doppelganger? No, it's not doppelganger. It's alter ego. So in the comments, somebody knowledgeable and sober has to explain in simple English. Use ChatGPT if you have to. Actually, I should try that. What is the difference between alter ego and a doppelganger? Let's do it. Why not? You're here for a long time, not a good time. Stand by. What is the difference between the literary terms alter ego and doppelganger? Well, I'm going to read this to you in its full because, surely I'm not the only idiot on BookTube who doesn't really understand these terms. I do have a master's in English, but I obviously didn't take a course in doppelganger or alter ego. Okay. They are related. This is ChatGPT. This is the one things that everybody's talking about. But I'm plagiarizing my response to this book tag prompt. Alter ego and doppelganger are related but distinct literary concepts. An alter ego refers to a character in a story who is a secondary self for the main character, and often serves as a contrast to the main character's personality. A doppelganger, on the other hand, is a ghostly or mystical double of a living person, usually portrayed as an evil or sinister version of the person. In literature, the doppelganger can serve as a symbol for a split personality, as a representation of evil, or as a warning of the character's impending death. Okay, so secondary self. So you can go back and evaluate how well I did with my choices, because I'm not sure they all fit. Number 7, It Takes Two, a duology. So I got 2. The first one, and I only have the first volume of it, Kate Atkinson's Life After Life, one of my favorite modern British novels. And then she wrote a second book called The Garden Ruins, and I didn't dislike it, I just didn't think it was nearly as good as Life After Life, so that's a duology, right? How did I do? Do I need to ask ChatGPT if I've understood the concept of duology? The other one is a book that I just talked about on my Friday Reads on February 3rd. You're going to see this tag video quite a bit later, so at least a few days later, that I will probably start reading on February 4th. And that is from the African country Cameroon, Leonora Miano's Twilight of Torture. And this is volume 1, Melancholy, translated from the French by Gila Walker. The second volume of Twilight of Torment. Oh dear. I apologize. I think I misread this as Twilight of Torture. The actual title is Twilight of Torment, Volume 1, Melancholy. Okay. The second volume of Twilight of Torment is Volume 2, Heritage. It will be published in June 2023. So there you go. It says that it's a 2-volume novel, so that's a duology, right? Number 8, On the Double, a book told in 2 timelines. And I have to say, I struggled with this one the most. And I struggled with it when I was sober. So I'm not going to be able to explain it very well, but I really had trouble getting my head around it. So number 1, I think this is like kind of genre fiction crap. So who cares about that? But, sorry, did I just say something really snobbish? Hello, my name is Sean the Book Maniac. But here's the struggle I had. Because there are works of literary fiction, which are the only kind of books worth reading, we can all acknowledge that are told in 2 timelines. And I have 2 examples for you. But I've probably read dozens and dozens of them. But what I realized in pondering this prompt is that when I read the book and then I think back on the book, I lose all of that dual timeline stuff. And I remember the book in the chronological order. So I put it into chronological order in my memory. So I can't remember, was it a dual timeline or not? And also, I'm not really sure about the dual timeline, and I wasn't sure when I was sober. So if a book has, the first section is set in the more distant past, and the second section is set in the present, is that a dual timeline, or do they have to be staggered, 1 chapter, 1 chapter, 1 chapter? I couldn't find any information that was authoritative on that point. I think the whole dual timeline concept is absolute malarkey. If it's not malarkey, here are 2 that I've read that I remember as having dual timelines that were kind of staggered. So, one is this fabulous short story cycle that came out in 2022, Night of the Living Res by Morgan Talty. What a masterful work of literature. It is the story of one family and a few of their friends and so on a particular indigenous reservation in Maine, fairly close to the present, and all the ways in which intergenerational trauma and all the racism that attaches thereto shapes and distorts and traumatizes and terrorizes these indigenous characters. And he does stagger the timeline, and part of reading the stories is each story jumps back or forth in time, and you're a little bit disoriented in the most fabulous way about, okay, how old is the main protagonist in this story? And is this really, and because the the nicknames are different for the main character when he's younger compared to when he's older. And so it takes a few stories for you to realize, oh, this is one and the same character. And then you have to start paying attention to the naming and putting it all together in a chronological way. And this one I did preserve in my memory, because I read it quite recently, late in 2022, the fact that it was a dual timeline, if that's a thing. Beautiful book. Don't worry about the literary terminology, because that can go in the trash. Read the book. And this tome from China, Ma Jian's Beijing Coma, translated by his spouse, Flora Drew. I read this back when I didn't have so much trouble getting to a tome. I loved this book. I have a review of it. I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And the protagonist was shot by the evil Chinese police very near the end, very near that violent end to the Tiananmen Square massacre, and left in a coma. And he has remained in a coma for I think 20 years, and he's in his old bedroom in his mother's apartment, and she's taking care of him, and he is actually conscious, and he can hear everything going on with mom on the phone and when visitors come to his mom's house, but he is paralyzed and unable to communicate, so they have no idea of his awareness. So the dual timelines are jumping back and forth between his earlier life, but mostly the Tiananmen Square uprising. And it's a fascinating, really inspiring portrayal of standing up to authoritarians, standing up to the communist assholes. And it is rich and vivid and heartbreaking. Okay, I've realized I'm really going on and on. It's the wine talking at length, boys and girls. I'm going to speed through the last few prompts. Number 9, A Perfect Pair. The last 2 books you gave 5 stars to. So I have talked about them very recently on the same Friday Reads. I'll put a link to that Friday Reads in the show notes. This is one of my favorite works of fiction ever, A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. I believe I have said in the past erroneously that it won the Booker Prize in 1980. It was nominated, but didn't win the Booker Prize, I think, in 1980. But that was a big mistake, because it's one of the best novels ever written. And while I had a more complicated relationship with this novel from Scotland, published about 4 or 5 years ago, it won me over heart and soul by the end. And it was also another 5-star read. Mayflies by Andrew O'Hagan. Check out that Friday Reads if you want more. Number 10, 2 for the Show. A book that has been adapted to film 2 or more times. Well, I think movies are stupid, so what the hell are you tormenting me with this question for? 11, Two's Company. A book with 2 or more authors or translated fiction. I decided to take the bigger challenge of 2 authors. And here is a YA novel from Canada. A trans YA novel from Canada. I apologize, I misspoke. Basil Sylvester is a non-binary writer. They are not a trans writer, and this is not a trans novel. The Fabulous Zed Watson by Basil Sylvester and their father, Kevin Sylvester. Kevin Sylvester has been what has he been? I didn't really know anything about him, but he is a broadcaster, documentary producer. And his child, Basil Sylvester, is a non-binary writer, and they collaborated. They wrote this novella, which is kind of a non-binary take on that transphobic writer that I believe her protagonist was Perry Hotter or something, and this is much better than that. I loved it. I will put a link to a wonderful interview with Basil and Kevin Sylvester that you should check out if you want more information about the book. Oh, okay, here's the last prompt. 12, Double Take. Recommend 2 books you think would pair together well, and tell us why. 2 Nigerian novels that really deserve to be read side by side. Akweke Emeze's Freshwater. It was my top read of whatever year it was published. 2018. I have a full review. It's a wonderful novel, and a big part of it is this Nigerian spirituality called Obanji, and the protagonist, Ada, their life is completely shaped and misshapen and obliterated in a really spiritual way by that spirituality. It's a book unlike any other book I've ever read before or since, and it makes a really nice companion to this Nigerian-Canadian novel that I've already talked about, Butter, Honey, Pig Bread by Francesca Ekwueze, where I've talked about the twins, but the twins' mother is also very similarly to Freshwater, controlled by, in deep, chaotic contact with the Obanji spirits, and they really deserve to be read side by side. They are books that really are in deep conversation one with the other. And finally, a pairing that is so perfect that the more modern novella affected me so deeply that I've been kind of not only rendered mute, unable to really talk about it, but also that I forgot the connection I made between the two works of fiction. And then when my friend Lindy read one of the volumes of the trilogy and the more modern novella, she made the connection. And I think it was in a private Voxer message to me. And I wrote back and said, "That's brilliant, and why didn't I think of that?" And then quite a few weeks later, I went back and watched my Friday Reads where I talked about this more modern novella and saw that I actually did make that connection. So we both did, and it is really an important connection. So that is, the older trilogy is the Alberta trilogy by the Norwegian writer Cora Sandell. Volume 1, Alberta and Jacob, published about 1926, I think. The second one, Alberta and Freedom, and the third one, Alberta Alone. And then this really stunning modern novella, which came out, 2021, 2022? 2020, Indelicacy by Amina Kane. And the connection is that both works of fiction are about a extremely unconfident artist. In Cora Sandell's trilogy, her protagonist, Alberta, wants to be a writer, but she doesn't trust herself. She doesn't trust her own abilities, and she, at several points over the trilogy, hits bottom in a way that's just heartrending to read, and then eventually pulls herself back up. But it's a long psychological journey for her to really grab hold of her birthright and explore her creativity. And it just spoke to me so deeply, and it's so beautifully written. And very similarly, the protagonist in Indelicacy is a lower class woman who has no training or education particularly. She's a cleaning lady at an art gallery, and she gets so incredibly stimulated by the art on the walls as she's vacuuming and sweeping and mopping that she starts writing about the art and starts to realize how much she wants to be a writer. And that's the core theme of this book. And those two, the Alberta trilogy by Cora Sandell and this slim novella, are in such deep dialogue that you have to read them all together. You absolutely must. So that is the Think Twice book tag, and I'm going to think more than twice about who I'm going to tag, because I really need to check online to see who's all done it, and I'll put a list of the taggees on the screen now. In the meantime, thanks for putting up with me, if you haven't already bailed on this video, and thanks for watching.